Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 versus Ultra Street Fighter 4. Like, to you, which game was bigger? Now, of course, everybody can go and pull statistics and just be like, well, you know, if you look at who was the last game at every tournament in the entrance, then you'd say this. But for you personally, like, which one was bigger for you? Because at that time, it just seemed like both of them was the man. It was just like really hard to put one over the other, and unless you just really had your own personal opinions and things like that. But during that time of fighting games, it was, man, it was booming. So let me stop before I get into it. But for you guys, which one was bigger to you? Which one had the most impact? Which one had the seemed like the biggest scene, the best scene, the hypest crowds? Like, which one was your favorite during that time, I guess we could say. So starting with you, Mr. Gamer.
So if I'm saying my favorite, it's definitely Marvel. But if I want to say the one that was the biggest, I'm gonna have to go with Street Fighter because mainly off just the fact alone that it was like you had more of a global presence with that game. Marvel was big, but it was mainly in the states. You rarely had any Japanese players. You had like Abigan and Nemo. Those like the two prominent ones. And what was his name? The what was his name? Something Joe, the guy that beat Yipes. What was it like? Seasons beating Summer Joe. I forgot the tournament, but that was like the three I can remember. And then Daigo tried it for a little bit, but that was short lived. So yeah, I'm gonna say overall the biggest is Street Fighter just because of that presence. Yeah, I mean France, people from everywhere in the world playing Street Fighter 4. And every time you had like tournaments, even in the States, you had people from a good selection of Japanese players. You had Momochi, Tokido, Daigo, Punko, Choco Blanca, all these players, everybody coming from everywhere. Again, Marvel was big, and you had like the curly mustache events and stuff like that. And it was super hype. So I'm gonna say that's my personal favorite because just the matches, the rivalries, watching Filipino champ play against people, a match of Filipino champ versus King Blue River, watching him get destroyed by Hulk after talking trash. It's just like stuff like that. Seeing those rivalries was just crazy. Watching Yipes play Dante, watching him play Magneto, watching Justin Wong come into his team of X-Men with the best friend Akuma. That was cool to see. Finally watching Chris G dominate the game and get into his own because he was tired of losing to just dumb stuff. So he's like, I'm gonna stop playing these random low tier characters and let me figure out a way to do something. And he figured out, I can just shoot fireball. I can turn this into FPS now. So yeah, I'm gonna say my favorite personally, just the hype and stuff alone from that game was Marvel 3. But yeah, Street Fighter 4, I'm gonna say overall, globally especially, it was bigger. It had a bigger scene. I mean, you had the start of the Capcom Cup and all that stuff. So I mean, Marvel really never had anything that big. Like I said, the curly mustache is probably like the biggest thing I would say that you could compare to that. Yipe started that, and that was pretty big for a long time. But yeah, it's got to go to Street Fighter because it was just globally. You had like France players. Rexon mentioned earlier, Luffy. I don't know Problem X. I think he played. I know I've mainly seen him play Street Fighter 5, but I'm not sure if he played 4. But yeah, it was just, I mean, even like before with the arcade scene was popping for that game. It was a lot of competitive stuff going on in the arcade scenes. And that was where most of the footage came from in the first place. When we first started seeing Street Fighter 4 was arcade cabinets, and then it came to consoles, and then we started seeing it then. So unfortunately, I kind of wish that Marvel would have been able to come out in arcades first before it hit consoles, but the arcade era's kind of died, especially here in the States. Like it's non-existent. My heart just breaks every time I go into like a game room at a little spot. Like I was at a gas station last week and had a game room, and it was just like some slot machines and like some pinball. I'm like, where the fighting games at, man? But we're in a whole different era now. But yeah, it's definitely got to be Street Fighter 4. That's my answer.
So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just off the bat, like say that I agree with Mr. Game and Lifts about I think Street Fighter 4 was like definitely bigger than Marvel versus Capcom 3, just because I mean, like reason stated earlier, like it was just it just felt like a more it felt like the presence of Street Fighter 4 was a lot bigger than Marvel vs. Capcom 3. You know what I mean? Like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was pretty hype, but I remember like there were some pretty hype moments in Street Fighter 4. I remember man, so many, like, geez. But I don't know, like the one that always just immediately comes to my head is that when Punko completely like came back and started smacking with Seth, man. Like that will forever live on in my heart
Man, I
as
forgot
one of my
about
favorite
Punko.
gaming
That dude
moments.
was a menace, bro. That dude was
Yeah,
a
man.
menace.
Yeah, man. I was like, man, that was cool. I remember when I first got Street Fighter 4, like, you know, everybody was playing that game. Everybody I knew was playing Street Fighter 4. Like everybody I knew. There was not, even if they didn't own Street Fighter 4, it didn't matter. They were playing Street Fighter 4. Like people would come, we had like a game club and we would be like, okay, what game are we gonna put on? Like we had like a projector screen. Like, what game we're gonna put on the projector screen? Why are you asking? Street Fighter 4. Put Street Fighter 4 on the projector screen. And of course, mad people would come in to play it. Everybody would come into play. Like all these people, like people who didn't even play Street Fighter 4 played Street Fighter 4. You know what I mean? Like so many people were introduced to fighting games through Street Fighter 4. And then like a lot of, I mean, there's so many people, man. Like me personally, I really wasn't playing fighting. I was playing fighting games intermittently before that. I played Tekken and stuff like that. But like that was the first time I actually sat down and said, okay, I'm gonna learn how to play this game. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the character I learned how to play was Dan. So I mean, you know, whatever. But at the same time, you know, it's like, you know, you gotta crawl before you can walk, right? Am I right? So, but yeah, man, I think Street Fighter 4, like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was cool, but I feel like in some ways, like I've stated this before, I feel like, especially on, like, because like when it came out on console, it just wasn't as fleshed out in terms of like, especially in terms of like stuff outside of the actual fighting. Like it just wasn't, like it just it just wasn't there, you know. And I'll be honest, like at that point in time when we were already in like in an online environment where people had moved away from each other, and the only way you could play somebody was online. So the last thing you want to do is like be in a match, be in a lobby with your friend, and you can't watch your friend play, and you just have to like guess what's going on because of the health bars. When, you know, like spectator mode was already in like games like Street Fighter 4. So it's like, what are you doing? Like, so I feel like that kind of set it back. I mean, like the game could be as hype as you want, but if you can't see the hype, what's the point? So I don't know. Like, but yeah, in closing, yeah, I would say like, yeah, Street Fighter 4 definitely, I think, for a lot of people, would be like, yeah, definitely the bigger game. Just because, I mean, there were so many iterations of it, man. Like there were so many different versions of it. Like the whole ultra system was pretty crazy, because then you could choose which like they had like one ultra per person, then you could choose which ultra you wanted later on. Like, and then I think they did like some kind of weird like dual ultra system like way later on or whatever in Ultra Street Fighter 4. It's like they just kept changing the game up a little bit, tweaked it every once in a while. It was like, man, like a perpetually changing game in some way, shape, or form, you know. And I feel like even now, like there are games that kind of mimic that kind of hype that like Street Fighter 4, because Street Fighter 4 is pretty hype in its own right, you know. And like games like, I feel like a game like Tekken 7 right now, like kind of in some ways mimics some of the hypeness and some of the presence, even though like some people would say it's not like, you know, as big as like Street Fighter 5, which is true. But like, let's be honest, a lot of people were playing Street Fighter 5 less out of like, oh man, like Street Fighter 5 is so great, and more out of like, I feel obligated to play Street Fighter 5 because I've been playing Street Fighter for so long. So like, you know, I feel like a game like Tekken, like Tekken is more, I would say, more closer to like that old feeling of like Street Fighter 4, and like the way that it like presents itself and everything, than like, you know, even like a game like Street Fighter 5, which is in the same franchise. So yeah, man, like I would say Street Fighter 4, final answer.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to say anything differently, because I believe you two are absolutely right. I felt like Street Fighter 4 was not only the bigger game, I felt like Street Fighter 4 was always treated by the FGC, by the tournaments, by Evo, as like the main event. kind of looking back at the hype of Street Fighter 4 tournaments and MVC3 tournaments, it was really preference. It was almost like watching WCW and WWF in the 90s. You change the channel, you flip the channel to both because you want to see what both were going on. You might like Street Fighter 4 more, but you would go over to the MVC and see what they had going on, what tournaments they had going on. But ultimately, the quality and like the presence of the community would, depending on where you were, would kind of trump over. But as far as remembering Street Fighter 4, I have to go with MC Amazing. Why I felt like Street Fighter 4 was bigger, and it's almost not unfair to MVC3 because they only had one major update. All to Ultimate MVC3 when they got the extra characters. MVC4 kept getting more characters, new mechanics. It felt like every year or every other year, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And as a result, the community it had also kind of grew with it as well. Like it started off kind of small, and then like I said earlier in the previous question, it was at the right time, right place. Twitch had become more popular. YouTube blew up, and like people started making content specifically for fighting games. I think of things like the Excellent Adventures, watching the Excellent Adventures with Gutex and Mike Ross, and just loving watching them play matches of Street Fighter 4 just because it was so enjoyable. And that kind of content changed how we looked at fighting games as a result. And I think Street Fighter 4 was in the right place to be seen more as not just a viewing for competitiveness, but just a viewing for content of just good content to watch in general. I could watch a Street Fighter 4 match now from back in the day and still enjoy it the same way. Still exciting to watch, still mechanically it's interesting. There's a large variety of characters, and once again, it was the game of character specialists. I feel like Street Fighter 4 was the biggest game of character specialists you have ever seen. There were so many different people playing different characters. So it was always fun to watch these different matchups. It was more about matchups between the fighters than it was matchups between the characters because you knew what characters they were going to play. You just want to see different matches between the different players. So I'm going to have to kind of agree with Mr. Gamerlift and MC that I feel like Street Fighter 4 was a bigger game. It was treated like a bigger game. Most of the tournaments it was the final game. I remember when it was at its last Evo, who will ever forget Ultra Chin crying on the broadcast because it was the end of an era. It was a real era that Street Fighter 4 brought with it. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever felt like we've even been there ever again. Like that era of MVC3 to Street Fighter 4, we might not ever get that again. We might not ever get that kind of era again. I hope I'm wrong. But we might not ever get that emotional investment. I think a part of it is too is we were younger then. A lot of us were in college or high school. We were just getting into fighting games, getting on our own and finding these communities. So it's not just about the game itself. It's about communities we fostered along the way and the beginning of those communities. And I think when we think about those games, Street Fighter 4, MVC3, especially Street Fighter 4 for me, I think about the friends I had at that time. I think about the competitive scene we had at that time. I remember the tournaments we went to, the hype events, the late nights, the beatdowns, the random full screen ultras from friends. We've been on one-on-one matchups. And those things, those are things you can't, like you said, convey with numbers, but you convey with memories.